They arrived in silence. 700 men, soldiers and specialists, stepping onto the red earth of Burkina Faso beneath a sky heavy with dust and destiny. Their boots did not thunder, but the world trembled. North Korea had come, not as conquerors, not as invaders, but as guardians, whispering promises of strength, discipline, and loyalty to a young leader whose name now echoes through Africa's winds. President Ibrahim Traoré. The headlines say they came to protect him. But history, my friends, has taught us one truth. When nations like these move together, there is always a deeper rhythm beneath the drums, a plan that stretches beyond borders, beyond the reach of the ordinary eye. So tonight we ask, what truly lies behind this alliance? Is it just security or strategy? Is this about survival or the birth of a new order in West Africa? Stay with me, because before this story ends, you'll see that Burkina Faso news may be telling only half the truth. The rest lies hidden in the shadow of power. Subscribe, beloved brothers and sisters, for we are about to walk through the storm together. And when truth reveals itself, you'll want to be right here, watching it unfold. There are moments in history when silence speaks louder than gunfire, when no speeches are made, no flags are raised, yet a new chapter begins. That is what happened when the planes from Pyongyang touched down in Ouagadougou. No journalists, no public parades, no broadcast ceremonies. Just sealed crates, quiet convoys, and 700 disciplined men whose eyes reflected a lifetime of obedience and endurance. The world looked away, at least at first. But those who watch patterns, who study the movements of nations, felt something shift in the soil of Africa. They knew this was not a routine visit, this was a signal. Burkina Faso, a land of warriors and poets, of deserts that swallow sound and spirits that do not bow, had just become the center of a story too big for its borders. A new chapter for a restless land. To understand this, you must first understand the fire that lives in the heart of this young nation. For decades, Burkina Faso has been bruised by colonial ghosts, insurgent violence, and political betrayal. Then came a soldier, not yet 35, but already carrying the weight of 1,000 storms, President Ibrahim Traoré. He rose like a spark in the night, armed not with riches or lineage, but with conviction. He spoke of dignity, of self-reliance, of breaking free from the strings that had long tied Africa's hands to Western puppeteers. And the people listened. They saw in him not just a man, but a mirror of their ancestors, the Sankaras, the Lumumbas, the forgotten giants who once dreamed of an Africa unchained. Yet to dream of freedom is one thing. To defend it is another. Traoré faced enemies within and without, rebellions fueled by foreign money, pressure from international powers that preferred a weak, compliant Burkina, economic sanctions, covert threats, even whispers of assassination. And so, when North Korea appeared on the horizon, offering protection, training, and expertise, it was not an act of desperation. It was an act of defiance. Two nations, both isolated by global powers, found in each other a reflection of shared struggle, endurance, pride, and resistance. Why North Korea? Now, many ask, why would North Korea, a nation already burdened by sanctions and suspicion, reach so far across the world to touch the soil of West Africa? The answer lies in understanding the mind of those who play the long game. For Pyongyang, this was not about distance, it was about influence, about proving that loyalty still exists outside the orbit of the West, about building bonds with those who refuse to kneel. Burkina Faso offered something that no summit in Geneva could: authenticity. A leader unafraid to stand alone, a people unbroken by poverty, a cause larger than trade or treaties, a moral alliance born of mutual resilience. So they came, soldiers, engineers, communication experts, intelligence officers, each carrying a task, a secret, a seed. Some to train local forces, some to advise on security, some perhaps to build networks unseen by the public eye. Together, they formed an invisible wall around a president who dared to speak the language of self-determination. And behind the curtain, a question lingered. Was this merely about protection or preparation? Because 700 is not a guard, it is a signal of intent. The whisper beneath the headlines. International analysts rushed to frame it their way. Authoritarian alliance, they said. Security over sovereignty, they claimed. But those who walk the red dust of Burkina Faso know this move carries more poetry than politics. It is about survival. It is about the dignity of a people who have grown tired of being lectured by those who colonized them yesterday and judge them today. When a nation like North Korea extends its hand, it is not just a military gesture. It is a message to the world. We do not need your approval to protect our own. And when a leader like Traoré accepts that hand, he is saying, we will write our destiny in our own ink, even if the world refuses to read it. This partnership, born in secrecy, is not built on ideology alone. It is a pact between two survivors, two countries that have learned to breathe in the thin air of defiance. The world may mock, but history remembers the bold. The dawn before the storm. And so, in the quiet hours before dawn, 700 North Korean boots stood firm on Burkina ground. Not one word shouted, not one anthem sung. Just purpose. A silent army guarding a dream that the world still struggles to understand. But every dream has a price. Every alliance, a consequence. For with protection comes dependence, and with strategy comes risk. As the dust settles, and the eyes of the world slowly turn toward Ouagadougou, one question grows louder. If this alliance is about survival today, what might it mean for tomorrow? Because sometimes, what looks like protection is the preparation for something far greater. Next, we will lift the veil on the deeper motives, the real plan behind this alliance. Is it about gold, influence, or a new African power rising from the ashes of dependency? When nations move in silence, they move with purpose. No country sends 700 trained men across continents without a map written in ambition. Behind every handshake, behind every oath of protection, there is a plan. A design that the world may not see, but one that history always reveals in time. So tonight, we lift the curtain. The first motive, protection of power. The first layer, my friends, is the most visible, protection. Traoré has risen not through diplomacy, but through defiance. His rule, still young, stands on the shifting sands of revolution. Around him, enemies whisper. Within the military, factions stir. Outside his borders, the old colonial powers wait like vultures in the heat, circling. North Korea, to him, is more than a shield. It is a mirror, a nation that has survived sanctions, isolation, propaganda, and yet still stands, still commands fear, loyalty, and order. For a young African president trying to stabilize a fractured nation, such resilience is not ideology, it is inspiration. The 700, then, are not merely soldiers, they are symbols of discipline, secrecy, endurance. They train local forces not just to fight, but to think differently, to reject dependency, to embrace control. And that, perhaps, is the first piece of the plan. Stability through control. To guard the leader, yes, but also to teach a new doctrine of statecraft. To help Traoré fortify his rule from within until Burkina Faso no longer bends beneath foreign pressure. But this is only the surface. 2. The second motive. The wealth beneath the sand. Beneath Burkina Faso's soil lies more than dust and history. There is gold, rivers of it. There are minerals the world needs, manganese, zinc, copper, and whispers of rare earth elements. To those who understand geopolitics, resources are not wealth, they are leverage. And here lies the second motive. For years, Western corporations have extracted Africa's riches while preaching equality. They have taken gold from Burkina's veins while returning only promises. But now, a new player steps in. North Korea, hungry for access, desperate for materials that sustain its industries and trade networks, sees opportunity in the shadows of Sahel. Officially, they send experts, engineers, advisors, security consultants. Unofficially, they could be establishing routes, discreet, protected, and mutually profitable for the exchange of knowledge, labor, and perhaps resources unrecorded. A silent economy. Built not on contracts, but on trust and secrecy. And here's the brilliance of it. Neither nation risks open confrontation. Burkina gains technical and military strength. North Korea gains economic breathing space. Both grow stronger, unseen by the eyes of the sanctions regime. Yes, the world may call it contraband diplomacy. But in a continent long exploited, one might call it something else: balance. Yet, there is still a third layer, deeper than the gold and the guns. The third motive: influence and the new axis. Every century, power redraws its maps, and in this century, Africa is no longer the world's playground. It is the world's prize. The United States, France, China, Russia all court her lands and leaders, each with promises draped in flags. But in that crowded theater, North Korea plays a different tune: quiet, loyal, patient. What if Pyongyang's real goal is not wealth or weapons, but presence? A foothold in West Africa, a region whose geopolitical importance grows with each conflict and each resource discovered. To have a trusted ally in Ouagadougou means proximity to Sahel's instability and influence over its resolution. Imagine it: North Korean advisors embedded within Burkina's military command, shaping doctrine, observing operations, learning from Africa's asymmetric wars, lessons that can later be taken home. Imagine training exchanges, intelligence coordination, shared technological developments, all beneath the veil of cooperation. In essence, Pyongyang secures not only access, but relevance. For a nation isolated by sanctions, relevance is power, influence is survival. And for Traoré, this alignment offers something no Western ally can promise: partnership without condescension, cooperation without lectures, respect between equals, forged in struggle. 4. The silent pact of the isolated. What binds Burkina Faso and North Korea is not ideology, it is solitude. Both have been cornered by the world, both have chosen not to surrender. And in that shared solitude they find strength. So this, perhaps, is the real plan: to forge an alliance of the unyielding. A partnership of nations that refuse to be told what they may or may not become. It is not a military pact, it is a spiritual one. Two peoples who have learned to fight in silence, now teaching each other how to stand, even when the world wishes them to kneel. And yet, my brothers and sisters, there is a cost to such courage, because every alliance forged in secrecy must one day face the light. What happens when the world begins to notice? When the quiet pact between Pyongyang and Ouagadougou collides with the outrage of the West, the suspicion of Africa, and the gaze of global power? In the next part, we'll uncover the consequences, the rising tension, the global reaction, and the echo that may reshape Africa's destiny. There comes a moment when every hidden move meets the light, when the whispers become headlines, and the quiet handshakes of the night are judged beneath the glare of the world's cameras. So it was with this alliance, this unspoken bond between President Ibrahim Traoré and the men of North Korea. At first it was a rumor, then a suspicion, and soon it became a storm. Ushortak the Western outcry. In the offices of Washington, Paris, and Brussels, diplomats exchanged glances heavy with unease. North Korea, In West Africa? They asked. Impossible. But it was true, and that truth spread like wildfire across policy briefings and newsrooms. They called it dangerous. They called it provocative. One official from the European Union whispered, "If this is real, Burkina Faso is walking a path of isolation." And yet they never saw the irony in their words. For decades, these same powers had isolated Burkina, sanctioned her, dictated her choices, drained her mines, and mocked her sovereignty. And now, when the nation chose her own protector, they were suddenly concerned. How convenient, how predictable, how human. The anger from the West was not about peace or democracy. It was about control. For if a young African leader can forge alliances without Western approval, then the old order begins to crumble. And that, my brothers and sisters, is what they fear most. Not North Korea's soldiers, but Africa's awakening. The African divide. But not all of Africa cheered. Some neighboring nations, bound by their own ties to France and America, began to distance themselves quietly. Officials in Ghana, in Côte d'Ivoire, in Senegal, whispered doubts. Traoré is playing with fire, they said. This could bring trouble to the region. And yet, in Mali, in Niger, in Guinea, the nations who have tasted their own revolutions, a different whisper grew. He is doing what we could not. They saw in him a symbol, a young lion roaring against an empire of whispers. Burkina Faso became more than a country. It became a mirror for the continent, reflecting both courage and consequence. For some, Traoré was a hero. For others, a rebel who dared too much. But everyone, friend or foe, knew one thing. Africa was watching. Third, the internal risk, yet inside Burkina, tension brewed. Foreign advisors walking the corridors of power, soldiers speaking a foreign tongue, crates sealed with unknown insignia, all stirred suspicion. Opposition leaders murmured, "Has our independence simply changed its uniform?" And that question cut deep. Because freedom, my friends, is not only about breaking chains, it is about knowing who holds the key. To depend on North Korea for protection might save the nation today, but what of tomorrow? Would the teacher one day become the master? Would the alliance meant for defense become a leash of its own? Traoré, ever the soldier, surely understood this. But leadership is never clean. He walks a tightrope between survival and surrender, between ideals and reality. And as he strengthens his fortress, he must pray the walls he builds to protect his people do not one day imprison them. 4. The cost of defiance. Then came the sanctions, quiet at first, restrictions, warnings, diplomatic frost. Then louder, cancelled projects, reduced aid, veiled threats from the IMF and World Bank. And the people, the ones in the villages and markets, began to feel it. Fuel prices rose, imports slowed, the economy strained. And yet, through the dust and the hardship, they still chanted his name. Because they understood something the outside world did not. Their leader may be young, may be reckless, but he is theirs. And that alone is worth enduring for. For too long, Africa has lived under leaders chosen by others. Now, for the first time in generations, they see one who stands unbent, unbought, unafraid. And so they whisper in the markets of Ouagadougou, "Let the West frown. We will build our future our own way." V. The turning of the tide. And yet, as the world scolds and the economy tightens, something unexpected happens. Other nations, small, quiet, watching from the sidelines, begin to take notice. From Zimbabwe to Eritrea, from Sudan to Central Africa, a question begins to echo. If Burkina can stand, why not us? And that is the power of example. One spark in the desert can set the horizon ablaze. One act of defiance can birth a movement of dignity. It may not be clear yet whether this alliance will strengthen Burkina Faso or shatter it. But history is not written in comfort. It is written in courage. Because sometimes the act of standing up is more important than the price you pay for doing so. But the story does not end here. The world is reacting, yes, but the ripples are spreading further than any analyst expected. In the next part, we turn our eyes outward. How does the United States, China, and the rest of the world see this new African defiance? And could it mark the beginning of a global shift in power, one that starts quietly in the dust of Ouagadougou? The world has a way of pretending to be surprised by the very storms it helped create. When Burkina Faso reached out for dignity, they called it radical. When she demanded respect, they called it dangerous. And when she chose her own allies, they called it a threat to global stability. But the truth is simple. It is not stability they mourn. It is control. The Western Alarm. In Washington's marble halls, voices rose with the same tired phrases: authoritarian ties, regional instability, threat to democracy. Analysts filled the airwaves with warnings. Sanctions were whispered. Military cooperation paused. They said, this could spread. And yes, that was the fear. Because if a small, landlocked African nation could say no and still stand, then others might find their voice too. The Western order, built on obedience and aid, dependency, trembled at the sight of one man, one flag, one act of defiance. Burkina Faso, through President Ibrahim Traoré, had done the unthinkable. He reminded the world that power is not inherited, it is claimed. Sekou. The Eastern calculation. In Beijing and Moscow, however, the tone was different. They watched, quietly, strategically. To them, Burkina Faso was not a rebel. It was an opportunity. A new node in the growing web of non-Western influence. China saw a potential trade route. Russia saw a potential ally in the information and security sphere. Both recognized the value of a young, independent African leader willing to challenge the Western script. And while North Korea moved visibly with troops and experts, the others moved invisibly through diplomacy, investment, technology. The axis of the excluded was expanding, one handshake at a time. Third, the African awakening. Across the continent, the streets murmured. From Bamako to Harare, from Accra to Windhoek, people whispered the same question. If they can stand, why not us? It was not about war. It was not about weapons. It was about the return of voice, of pride, of memory. The old order had told Africa for decades, be quiet, be grateful, be small. But a new generation, inspired by Traoré's courage and the silent backing of unconventional allies, began to believe again in sovereignty without permission. Africa, once the world's silent resource, was now learning to speak in its own name. 4. The turning point. And so the world watches, anxious, divided. For the first time in decades, the balance of power is not being negotiated in the skyscrapers of New York or Geneva. It is shifting, quietly, beneath the Sahel sun. The sand, once trampled by colonizers, now hides the footprints of a new alliance, an alliance of the defiant, the forgotten, the determined. But where does this road lead? Is Burkina Faso walking toward sovereignty or solitude? In the next part, we look ahead, at the road forward, the risks, the promises, and the dream that might yet rise from the red dust of Africa. The dust has not yet settled. The drums of rumor still echo across the Sahel. And yet, somewhere in the heart of Ouagadougou, a quiet vision takes shape. A nation, small in size but immense in spirit, stands at the crossroads of destiny. Burkina Faso has always been called the land of upright people. And now, the world sees what that truly means. The short road, building a fortress of self-reliance. In the short term, the path is harsh. The sanctions bite, the economy strains, the critics grow louder. But struggle, my brothers and sisters, is the price of sovereignty. President Ibrahim Traoré knows that no nation becomes free by convenience. The 700 from North Korea are not the story. They are the scaffolding. The real construction happens in the hearts of his people. He must build industries that serve, not sell. He must strengthen the military, not as an arm of fear, but as a guardian of dignity. He must teach his nation to stand without leaning on any foreign wall, whether Western or Eastern. That is the first road. Self-reliance, built through pain, but paved with pride. 2. The middle road. The new African compass. 5 years from now, if this vision endures, Burkina Faso could become a compass for a continent, a symbol that whispers, "We are not too small to be sovereign." This road is not about rebellion. It is about renewal. A model where African nations trade with each other, protect each other, and trust each other, instead of looking overseas for permission to breathe. And if this model holds, if Burkina Faso's resilience survives the storm, then Ouagadougou may yet become the beating heart of a new African consciousness. Not a superpower in might, but a superpower in meaning. 3. The long road between legacy and legend. But there is a longer road still, one that stretches beyond Traoré, beyond the 700, beyond the headlines of Burkina Faso news. It is the road of legacy. One day these soldiers will go home. One day sanctions will ease, alliances will shift, and history will decide what was wise and what was foolish. But the true question is this: will Burkina Faso stand taller because of this alliance, or will it be remembered as a pawn in someone else's game? That depends not on Pyongyang or Paris. It depends on the Burkinabe people. If they use this moment to build schools, industries, systems of justice, then this chapter will be written in gold. But if they trade their independence for influence, their freedom for favor, then this chapter will fade into the long, gray shadow of history. A fourth. The hope beyond the horizon. Still, I believe, and I say this with conviction, that something divine stirs in this story. It is as if the ancestors of Sankara rise again through the voice of Traoré, reminding the world that Africa does not kneel forever. The road ahead is not smooth, but it is sacred, because every step forward, every decision to stand tall is a prayer in motion, a prayer for dignity, for destiny, for Africa's awakening. And when the sun sets on this new chapter, the question will not be, did Burkina Faso survive? The question will be, did the world finally learn to listen? Because what is rising from the Sahel is not rebellion, it is resurrection. And so, my brothers and sisters, the story of Burkina Faso is not merely the tale of 700 soldiers. It is the story of a nation refusing to disappear. It is the heartbeat of Africa itself, steady, proud, defiant. When President Ibrahim Traoré chose to walk a path unblessed by the West, he did not choose ease. He chose truth. He chose the long road, the hard road, the righteous road. For every generation, there must be one who dares to say, "No more." And in this generation, that voice rose from the red earth of Ouagadougou. The Burkina Faso news may report alliances, shipments, and speeches, but what they cannot measure is the spirit, the unyielding flame of a people who refuse to be broken. That flame burns now across a continent awakening to its worth. It burns in the eyes of young Africans who say, "We too will stand." North Korea's presence may fade, the headlines may change, but the echo will remain. Africa has found her courage again. And to those watching from afar, in the halls of power, in the comfort of cynicism, remember this: a free people do not ask permission to defend themselves. A sovereign nation does not apologize for surviving. So let the world debate the politics. Let analysts dissect motives. For the people of Burkina Faso, this is not a scandal. It is a statement. The time has come for Africa to define herself not by aid, but by action. Not by pity, but by pride. And though the winds of challenge will blow, this time the roots run too deep. Because this is the land of upright people, and the world had better remember what that means. My brothers and sisters, if this story moved you, if you believe in the strength of a free Africa, subscribe, share this message, and let your voice be heard. Tell the world that the real headline behind Burkina Faso news is not fear, but faith. Because faith, like freedom, cannot be colonized. Question for you. Do you believe this alliance marks a new dawn for Africa, or another test of its soul? Let your thoughts rise in the comments, for history is listening, and so are we.